Welcome to Twice Shores. I'm Joe. In this video, I build a second jet ski dolly. Is it better or worse than my first one? Then I do a curb test to see if I can even get this into my garage over those pesky garage thresholds. And I also take my dolly on a road test because, I don't know, science? Stay tuned as I put this all together. Here's all the stuff you'll need to build this dolly. For the corners of the dolly, I used a 6x6 inch post. And keep in mind, all this lumber is treated for the outdoors so that it will last longer and not rot. And then I have a 12-foot length of a 2x4, which will give me my 2 bunks. And then shown here, I have 2 1x8 treated boards, and eventually I got a third one because this is just not enough, so you'll need 3 8-foot lengths of 1x8. For the hardware, I have 24 9-inch 3/8 inch carriage bolts with 24 nuts to go with them, 48 3/8 washer to go with those. And remember, when you're picking out your nuts, bolts, and washers in the store, make sure that each and every one of them are the right size. They do like to get mixed up on those store shelves. 4 caster wheels. These are 6-inch from base of the wheel to the top of the mount. That's a 6-inch height. And I've got about 24 deck sinker screws. Let me tell you, those are big, heavy-duty deck screws. And then a box of rust-proof staples for stapling the carpet onto the bunks. And then I grabbed a box of 2-inch deck screws, and that's about 30 of them. And then, of course, you're going to need the carpeting for the bunks. And for the tools, I have a drill, an impact driver, a socket wrench with a socket that fits 3/8 inch bolts. And I have 2 3/8 inch drill bits, one of them that's short and one of them that's long. I use the short one to drill first and then the long one to finish the hole. You'll need a staple gun, a rubber hammer, a small hammer, and a couple things that aren't shown are a tape measure, a pen, a square, and a plumb bob. I'll show you where those come in later. Oh yeah, don't forget a table saw and a chop saw. You don't need the miter saw or the table saw, but if you use a hand saw instead of those, it's going to take you quite a bit longer. To make our angled cut on our first corner, we've got 16.5 inches, the bottom to the top of the angle. And we have 16 inches here from the bottom of the corner piece to the bottom of the angle piece. So we measure up 16 inches to here, measure up 16.5 inches to here, and then we bring in our straight edge and you draw your line. You mark it, turn it over, and we'll use our square edge to make a perfectly straight line across. And we'll turn it over and do the same on the other side. And so when we turn it onto the fourth side, we continue those lines again. And then we'll have our second angled side. We align the angle of our miter saw so that the blade is right on that line. It makes that perfect angled cut. Make sure it's perfectly against the rear fence. And we'll do the same thing for the other side. Okay, looks pretty good. So we'll lock it down. And there we have our angled piece. Nice flat bottom. So now we got our first 2 corners done. Now we'll do the next. Roll it. Right, that looks pretty good. Not bad. So I want this dolly to fit this Sea-Doo almost perfectly, and I've cut these angles on the corners here a little bit too shallow. What I will do though is measure this in a different way so that we make sure we get it right. Now this Sea-Doo does have a shallower hull as far as the angle goes on the bottom, so that's what I'm going for here, is a very good custom fit for this particular jet ski. So for that, we're going to use an angle measurer and what's called a plumb bob. And this will get us a little bit closer to exact of that angle that we need. Now we could put the bunks on these corners, no problem, and it will work, no problem. But for this project, I want to make it as close to perfect as I can. First thing I'm going to do is tape up my plumb bob so it's even with the edge of the bunk. Right about there. Now that we've got our plumb bob set, we're going to take our angle finder, and we're not really going to use the numbers that come up on the screen. We're just going to mark it on the wood. So we're going to get our straight up and down angle and hold it as close to that as you possibly can. Now that we've found the right angle that our bunk should be set at, we're going to take our angle finder, put a mark here in the corner, which you don't really need to do, and we could draw our line. So here's where this bunk failed on this trailer. It's right here at the bracket, and that's very common. That wood will rot right through, right on the bracket. A lot of these dollies, people will use brackets to put the bunks on. So there'll be a bracket attached to here, and then the bunks on top of the bracket. I don't like that. The brackets are a big fail point in a lot of the trailers, and I plan on keeping these dollies outside, and I don't want them to fail right away. So I'm going to give them a lot of surface area to rest on so that there's a lot of support. All right, now we have our 4 recut, re-angled corners of our dolly, and these are definitely going to fit this particular Sea-Doo a lot better. Next, I'm going to rip 60 inches for these little boards here. And what I do with these little boards is I can move them around so that these bolts don't interfere with the other bolts going the other direction. And what this also does is allow me to move this down a little bit so that the hull doesn't hit it when it goes on there. All right, we've got our planks cut. Now we're gonna cut it this way. So we'll have 1 for the front, 2 for the front, 1 for the back, and 2 for the back. Let's get going. All right, so the first part that you want to assemble are 2 of the corners and 2 of the 3-foot long 1x8 boards. And you can see right here, 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 and here, I added my deck screws while the corners were sitting flat on the cement to make everything square. So you just pop in those deck screws, 2 on each side of corner, and once you have that done, you can repeat for the other piece. Make sure the angle is facing one of the long sides on both of the pieces, and those will be the inside of your dolly. We will make our holes for our through bolts and put those in. The first bit that I'm going to use for these holes is this smaller 3/8 inch bit, and then this longer one to go all the way through once the hole's been started with the small hole. Next, we're going to hammer these zinc bolts with these washers. These are 3/8 inch washers and 3/8 inch through bolts through every one of these. And then we're going to put another washer and a nut on the other side. And now I'm going to flip this over, and we're going to drive the bolts through on the outside of the dolly so that the part of the bolt that sticks out is on the inside and not going to catch on anything or get in the way. There's 2. All right, let's flip this over and secure these with some more washers and nuts. And so I had to get a longer socket for this. This is a longer one. These are 9/16 sockets, and it has to fit over the length of these bolts. Now I got these bolts a little bit longer than they needed to be. I did that for a reason, because if these things ever come loose, if these nuts come off, I want this to not come off completely, so this thing completely fails. I want to be able to visually see if that nut is halfway down there to know that I need to tighten this up. And so that's intentionally done. It may look a little sloppy to have these bolts sticking out, but they face the inside of the dolly, so you don't really see them. All right, that looks pretty good. We are going to do the other side of the dolly. Bunks will sit here, and so we'll do the other side. with humidity and temperature fluctuations, you're gonna wanna check these bolts every once in a while just to make sure they're nice and snug, because this is wood, and wood will shrink and expand with temperature and humidity. So it's always a good idea, maybe once a year, tighten all these down, make sure they're snug, and you'll never have to worry. Now we're gonna do our front and back like that. So we're gonna take these boards that we ripped down and through bolt them through here, and then to get them to line up, we're gonna take a extra piece of 1x8, lay it on the ground, and then put this on top. We'll drill, put a couple of deck screws in there to hold them, just like the sides, and then drill and through bolt, just like we just did with the sides. We'll do it for this side, we'll do it for that side, and then we'll add a second board on each outside to stabilize it even more, and then we'll be on to the wheels. Now I've got my front and back wood pieces secured on with deck screws, and now I'm going to put those extra pieces below it with some heavy duty deck screws, and those will be permanent. We're not going to use through bolts on those two bottom ones. I'll show you what I mean. So for this bottom support piece for the front and back, we're going to center these up right in between our through bolts, and we're going to take these big heavy duty deck anchor screws and put 2 in each here. To add some extra support so that these side pieces don't splay out. It's going to hold it even tighter along with these. We're putting through bolts through these that'll go through the front and back here, but we're not putting a back across from this, so that we're just going to bolt these in. And we'll do this from the front and for the back. And then once we get all those on, then we're going to drill our holes for our through bolts for each side, and then it'll be on to the wheels. And don't tighten these all the way, put one in on the end. And this is a mistake that I made on the first one. I put 2 in here, and then this thing was wonky. It wasn't exactly straight. It just looks a little funny. See the same thing on the other side. Okay, same deal as before. We're going to mark our holes with this Sharpie, and then we're going to drill with a short bit, 3/8 bit, and then a longer 3/8 bit to go all the way through. And then we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 on the other side. All right, let's flip this thing over. All right, we've got our through bolts through. Now we'll put some washers and nuts on the other side. On goes the washers and the nuts. So building it this way, some people ask, hey, is that even going to be square? Well, square enough. We're going to put on our caster wheels and we're going to center them up so that it doesn't interfere or run into our through bolts. All right, we got the wheels on. Let's flip her over and see how she rolls. All right, we got the base done with the wheels. Now we're gonna put the bunks on here flush with the posts. And for that, we're gonna use some heavy duty decking screws and we're gonna countersink those so that they're flush with the top so the jet skis don't hang up on the screws. And then I'm gonna add some of our marine grade carpeting on top. We'll mark this for a foot overhang on both sides. And we'll have this recessed back about 1 inch. Okay, for these ends, we're going to fold these over. We're going to cut the corners, fold them over, and then just staple them down. First thing we're going to do is cut the corners. So we'll come through it about here. Do the same for the other side. That one wasn't very clean, but it'll do the job. So we'll taper this down a little bit. Taper this down a little bit. And then we'll just fold these over and staple them. Something like that. And this doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to stay. So we'll take our hammer, just hammer these all down. All right, let's do the other side. And while I got you here, this is what I'm using as staples. They're rust proof. Measure it out with the Sharpie, 1 foot of overhang on each side. All right, so I'm going to take my 5/8 inch paddle bit to make my countersink impressions on the top. We'll do that first. Another way, the way I did it in the other video, I just put some deck screws to hold it and then did it, but I'm not going to put those deck screws in this time because I don't need to. And these hole placements don't have to be exact. We'll switch out that 5/8 bit to a drill bit that will drill the pilot holes for our decking screws. Okay, so that one moved on me a little bit. So what I'm going to do is take my first screw and sink that one in so the rest of them won't move. All right, we got our pilot holes drilled and our countersinks in. There, that looks pretty good. Let's get this carpet on. I'm going to take the factory edge, and that's where I'm going to start with the stapling. And we'll make the ends even as we can make it. It's not a big deal because we're going to cut it it's not a big deal because we'll cut it to exact size when we're done. So I'm going to put the first staple in and just double check I've left enough room on both ends. Make sure we hit the wood. And you can see this overlap here. We'll have to cut this. Alright, good. Now let's fold over the excess underneath. Out of the way. Hey, that looks pretty good. That matches up almost perfectly. Okay, my next step is to attach straps between the trailer and the dolly. And make sure your front ratchet straps are disconnected on the front of your trailer. You don't want to be struggling with this for hours just to have that thing connected in the front. And if you ever get to the point where this thing is just too heavy to wiggle off onto your new dolly, that's okay. What I'm gonna do is just pull it onto here using my car. All right, so what I did, I made the mistake of pulling this off onto the dolly just a little bit too far. So I'm gonna reattach my trailer ratchet strap, and I'm gonna pull it back about 6 inches just to make sure this thing is center. Yeah, I think that's perfect. All right, we're gonna go ahead and detach this and pull our dolly away. That crack is just a little bit too high for my comfort. I don't want to break off one of the wheels, so I'm going to employ the use of a wooden dowel, or two. And you could put these in your crack as sort of a step, and this round edge will help the wheel roll and go forward so that it doesn't just hit the crack like a brick wall. And if you've got a better way to get your Sea-Doo up and over those cracks, share it in the comments because I'd love to know. And now it's time for the road test. Hey, thanks for watching Hawaii Shores. If you want more of this content, like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Come on, what are you waiting for? Come on, what are you waiting for?